I'm going to start by reading a portion of Scripture to you from Genesis chapter 33. Genesis chapter 33, can we put that up there? Then Jacob looked up and saw Esau coming with his 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and his two servant wives. He put the servant wives and their children at the front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. Then Jacob went on ahead. As he approached his brother, he bowed to the ground 7 times before him. Then Esau ran to meet him and embraced him, threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they both wept. Then Esau looked at the women and children and asked, "Who are these people with you?" "These are the children God has graciously given to me, your servant," Jacob replied. Then the servant wives came forward with their children and bowed before him. Next came Leah with her children, and they bowed before him. And finally, Joseph and Rachel came forward and bowed before him. "And what were all the flocks and herds I met as I came?" Esau asked. Jacob replied, "They are a gift, my lord, to ensure your friendship." "My brother, I have plenty," Esau answered. "Keep what you have for yourself." So we come to the end of the story, and it only took us all summer, so we really just breezed through it. So we've been on this teaching series for the life of Jacob this whole summer. So one of the things I think we firmly established at the beginning is that Jacob isn't exactly a picture of godliness. Did we get that? Yes. That he's a manipulator and a deceiver, and he did a good amount of relational damage because of that. And I just want to remind you, like, the surprise to this whole story is that this is a man God chooses to bless, which just messes with our normal expectations, doesn't it? Because our expectation, our normal expectation is this: God blesses those who deserve to be blessed, right? That's what our normal expectation is. So people who have done something, demonstrated something, somehow demonstrated to God that I am the kind of person you want to bless. They've proven themselves somehow to God, right? But that is not Jacob's story. Jacob's story is more like this: in spite of the kind of man you are, God has chosen to bless you. It's surprising, it's undeserved, and I am so thankful for this one, aren't you? I mean, we don't always feel it, but there are those times when we're well aware of the grace that is undeserved. And so to read Jacob's story and to know that God blesses a man like that, well, there's hope for you and me, right? That's the beauty of this story. So we established at the very beginning about Jacob's inclination toward deception and manipulation. So here's what I want to do as we close it out. I want us to recognize that while we've hit on this as a main issue in his life, it's not really the main issue in his life. Now that may surprise you because you're like, I'm pretty sure you said that was the main issue in his life. So to be clear, this was a problem. We're not saying that's not the case. It's just not the problem. In fact, these issues of manipulation and deception they're attached to deeper issues. We might say these are the symptoms of the deeper issues. So in order to get at that, we have to look at Jacob. Okay, he's a man who's always trying to get ahead, right? Lying and cheating are useful for getting ahead. That's what he's discovered. But here's the question we need to ask of Jacob and then also ourselves. Why does Jacob have this desperate need to get ahead? See, that's the deeper issue. Why does he need to get ahead? And so just like Jacob, with us, there are those deeper issues. I'm pretty sure at some time in your life, you have uttered the words or thought in your head, why do I do that? Why do I respond like that? Why do I respond to that person like that? Why, when this situation comes, do I have so little patience? Like, why? What is driving that? The deeper issues. So as we looked at Jacob's story, he's got a couple of deeper issues. Well, there's a bunch of them, but we're going to highlight two. We're going to highlight one character issue and one spiritual issue, and then we're going to kind of see how that gets treated all the way through. So, again, most of us are well aware of our own selfishness. This is one of Jacob's issues. He was selfish. That's easy to see, right? But not only was he selfish, you pair that with ambition, and so you've got selfishness plus ambition, which we call selfish ambition, right? But the two partnered together, they're pretty significant. So we all get selfishness. Most of us get selfish ambition. We've either been the driver of selfish ambition or we've experienced it, got run over by somebody with selfish ambition. But it's this problem that if you have a large dose of ambition and selfishness, well, that wreaks havoc, doesn't it? And so for Jacob, this was one of the drivers in his life. He was selfish and he was ambitious. So selfish ambition is this driver. This is his need to get ahead. And when selfish ambition goes unchecked, it leads to all kinds of wacky ways of thinking. Jacob, for his part, was obsessed with winning, obsessed with getting ahead. It was this hidden driver in his life. It was what moved him. And since he was obsessed with getting ahead, well, if you're going to get ahead, you have to keep score, don't you? Like, we have to know where I stand in this whole thing. And so from this selfish ambition standpoint, for Jacob, there's kind of like always a scoreboard. Or another way to put it is, there's always a winner and a loser. And if you're not the winner, guess which one you are? You're the loser. And so for Jacob, his whole thing is trying to make sure he is the winner and not the loser. Because if you win, well, then I lose. That's the mindset. So this is Jacob's life, right? It's this selfish ambition, and kind of the root, like the main issue of selfishness is this: I choose me. So whatever the circumstance, whatever dilemma I'm facing, selfishness always says, well, I choose me, right? And so this was his underlying issue, is he always chooses himself. So he's trying to get ahead, always choosing himself, and this is where deception and manipulation come in. Well, here's a way, kind of a shortcut, that I can get ahead and advance my own agenda. So this is one of the drivers for Jacob. But he had a spiritual issue as well. And the spiritual issue was this deep, fierce sense of self-reliance. So he was always trying to figure out how he could turn things to his advantage. It was on him to figure out how to get ahead. So from that standpoint, Jacob's mindset is, you get what you take. You take what you want. You don't need to ask for help. You don't need help. You find a way to take what you want. And as we've seen, and as we know from life experience, that always comes at other people's expense, doesn't it? So for him, if he had to bend the rules, if that meant somebody kind of got run over by the selfish ambition bus, well, so be it. So he was driven by selfish ambition, and he was fiercely self-reliant, and so he went through life with this attitude: I can handle whatever comes. He could outwit, outlast, outplay everyone. And so this strong sense of self-reliance, the second one, it's a spiritual problem because the self-reliant mindset runs counter to faith. So listen, The intensely self-reliant mindset runs counter to faith. So faith, by nature, by definition, is dependent. Self-sufficiency, by nature, by definition, is independent. Faith, it's humble. Self-sufficiency, proud. I got this. I can figure it out. Faith believes that even when I can't control things, I may not love it, but it's okay because God is in control. Self-sufficiency says, if I'm not in control, that's a crisis. And I got to find a way to get in control. Not being in control is not an option. Find a way to get in control. And so this is Jacob's life, with these two underlying issues driving him, always fighting to be in control, which presented some problems in terms of him trying to walk by faith. So let me illustrate trying to be in control and walking by faith and how they kind of interfere with each other. So over the years, I've moved a couple times, and I've had the opportunity to help people move quite a few times. I'm sure some of you guys have too, right? And so if you can picture moving a big piece of furniture, a couch, a dresser, something that takes two people on either side. And so here's been part of my experience in moving and helping people move, that there are often helpers who are in the way. Have you ever noticed it? Right? So you're on either side of a couch trying to work it through the door, and there's somebody shouting advice about which way to turn it and do this and take the legs off, and you're like, okay, we got it. Just how about you go find a cup of coffee or something, and we'll take care of the couch. Or if you've ever had somebody take up the middle of the couch, and you're like, okay, so we cannot get through that doorway with you helping in the middle there, right? Or I've had people graciously hold the door for me while standing in the way of the door, right? Do you know what I'm talking about? So I want you to keep this idea of the helper who's in the way. And now come back to Jacob's life. Because Jacob was the one helping God bless him, and was constantly in the way, wasn't he? He was a man who was literally living under a promise from God that I'm going to make you a great nation. I'm going to bless you. And God was going to do it, and God was doing it. But Jacob constantly got in the way, trying to direct things or grab corners or hold the middle or hold the door, whatever he's trying to do to help God get this job done. Or we might say it like this: ensure that God gets everything through the door. He was always trying to be in control, fiercely self-sufficient, always has his hands on things, always has a scheme or a plan. But here's what I want you to understand about faith, using our moving a furniture analogy. Faith is a willingness to step aside and trust that God can get everything through the door, and he doesn't need my help. But if you're like me, you're like, well, I'll just grab a corner. I'll hold the door. I'll take up the middle. God doesn't need our help. And faith is a willingness to step back and trust that God can get everything through the doorway. It understands that sometimes I just need to be out of the way and let God do what God is going to do. Jacob was a man who struggled to get out of the way. I think one of the enlightening things as we've walked with Jacob is we can identify. We may not be at the extremes that Jacob's at, but we get it. We understand what it is to be selfish. We understand what it is to be self-reliant. We know what it is to want to be in control. We know what it is to try to help God get things through the door, don't we? Jacob, this was his journey and his story. And it's ours, right? But this is why this wrestling piece in Jacob's story that we looked at last week, this is why that wrestling piece was so important. Because when Jacob was wrestling all night with this stranger that showed up, he was confident, he was fighting hard, he was this close to overcoming this man. And then, if you recall, it all changed with just a touch to the hip. And with that one little touch that wrenches his hip, all his leverage is gone, all his power is gone, all his ability to wrestle and fight or find a way to win, it's gone. Winning is no longer an option, and this is where God takes him, bringing him to the end of himself and burrowing down to these root issues that drive him, right? Selfish ambition and self-reliance. And so at the end of that wrestling match, if you recall, the only thing Jacob could do was cling, hold on, and plead for a blessing. Like for a self-reliant man, that is the end of yourself, isn't it? It would be this powerful and persistent living illustration for Jacob that he cannot control everything, that he's not always strong enough, that he can't always win, he can't always find a way. And then so in this wrestling match, he's reduced to clinging. But here's what I want us to see. That there's this connection between letting go of self-reliance and making room for faith. If you picture it like a packed bag, like there's pieces in there that are self-reliance and there's pieces in there that are faith. In order for you to put more pieces of faith, you have to unpack some of the self-reliance. You following me? And so for Jacob, this is what he comes to, is he's having to realize, I've got to pull out some of these things out of my bag to make room for more faith. So out of that wrestling then, where he sorts out these core issues, he now sets out to face Esau with a limp, right? This nagging reminder of these issues that have dogged him. And so chapter 33 brings this abrupt shift. Like we just closed the chapter on 32, right, where he wrestles and he's got the limp. And then, just like that, here's what we read. Jacob looked up, and there was Esau coming with 400 men. Here we go. Like this is what he's been dreading. This is what he has been worried about. This is why he's stayed in camp fear and wrestled to be in camp faith, because he knew Esau was coming with 400 men. And so here it is, just like that. He's there. And here's what Jacob knows in this moment. That if Esau is bent on revenge after all of these years, there's literally nothing he can do to stop it. He has no leverage. He has no control. He has no advantages. There's nothing his self-reliance brings to the table on this one. The only thing he can do is humbly throw himself at the feet of his brother and then trust that God's got this, which isn't easy for any of us and definitely wasn't easy for Jacob. So he gathers his family and he arranges them in groups and he lines them up to meet Esau, hoping that God would intervene and that Esau would be gracious. So watch what he does next, because this touches on something we looked at last week. And then he himself went ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. So a couple things to notice here. First, if you recall, last week prior to the wrestling match, he had arranged everybody out in front of him, right? All the animals that went ahead, and then his family went ahead, and he was alone on the other side of the river, which created this situation that if things went bad, who was the last one that was going to get it? It was Esau. I mean, it was Jacob waiting for Esau. So he's on the other side of the river. So Esau's going to go through everybody before he finally gets to Jacob. So what does that do? Well, if you're at the end, you get to evaluate and react and adapt. If things go bad, you can look at it and decide what's your next move. Yes, that may cost some of your family members, but that's how he had set it up, wasn't it? So now look at this. Completely different, isn't it, after the night of wrestling? In this case, he steps out in front of his family. So now, instead of the last one to get it, he's now the first one that's going to get it if Esau wants revenge. He is the first one Esau is going to meet, and then he'll meet the family. If Esau has any plans to harm him, he's going to start with Jacob. He's the first one in harm's way, which is an amazing difference for Jacob, right? It represents a place of humility and faith, a setting aside of self-reliance, setting aside selfish ambition. And while he always treated those as his strengths, this is a different kind of strength, isn't it? To step out in front of your family and be the first one. It represents a significant change for Jacob. So Jacob is bowing down to his brother Esau, this position of humility. And so he's placing himself completely at his mercy. Think about this, though. So we go right from chapter 32, where he was wrestling, we go to 33, and oh, now he sees Esau. But remember the hip thing? So what does that do to him bowing down? It makes it a thing, doesn't it? So not only is Jacob humbling himself personally, setting aside his pride, but it's painful for him to take this position. And if you read it, you'll notice he did it 7 times. Ow! Right? Wow. But here's what he's doing. He's humbling himself and throwing himself at his brother's mercy. And it was not easy, both in terms of physical pain and in laying aside his pride. So then his whole family follows his example. And so he went on to bow down. The female servants and their children approached. They bowed down. Leah and her children came. They bowed down. Last of all came Joseph and Rachel, and they too bowed down. And so pause, and I want you to notice this, that they all bow down before Esau. So now go back to the stolen blessing from 20 years ago, right? So when Isaac means to give a blessing to Esau, Jacob sneaks in, dresses up. His father's failing eyesight allows this to happen. And so he pronounces a blessing over Jacob that was supposed to be for Esau, and we call that the stolen blessing. And so in that stolen blessing that was spoken, here's what Isaac said. May the sons of your mother bow down to you. So who is bowing down currently? It's not Esau bowing before Jacob. It's Jacob bowing before Esau. But there's more. Jacob, in this encounter with his brother repeatedly refers to Esau as his Lord. It's meant to say, you're here, I'm subservient. Jacob describes himself multiple times this way, and again, it echoes the blessing, so here's part of what was spoken. You will be Lord over your brothers. Oh, well, that's interesting. It's not Jacob here, it's Esau. And so then you get to the third piece. Jacob sends all these blessings, these material blessings ahead in chapter 32 to give a gift. And Esau looks at him, he's like, I don't need your animals. I've got all I need. And Jacob says, I want you to accept these gifts because God has dealt graciously with me. So go back to the stolen blessing. Part of it was material blessing, wasn't it? And so here's what I want you to see, that what he does with his brother is opposite of everything he did 20 years ago. It's as if Jacob is giving back portions of the blessing that he stole so many years ago. I don't know if it's intentional. We don't know that. It would be great, like if we could say, and then he did all of this to make restitution, but we don't get that. Maybe it was unintentional, but this is what God intended to happen, so that stolen blessing, we're going to turn around and give some of that back as restitution. In that case, it would be involuntary restitution. But here's what I want us to see as this unfolds, that one way or another, there is a giving back of what was taken so many years ago. Jacob is now before his brother. He's humble, he's submissive, not a hint of pride or scheming or agendas or deception. He makes no demands, there are no tricks. And so now it's Esau's turn to respond. And then Esau ran to meet him and embraced him, threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they both wept. So if you didn't know the story, is that how you were expecting it to go? I mean, Jacob had been bracing himself for Esau's vow of revenge. And if you look back to that vow was not just a right now, it was someday. So it was a vow he intended to hold on to. And so for Jacob, in his part, as he comes before his brother, there's a chance his brother kills him. Here's the best case scenario probably from Jacob's standpoint, that if he doesn't kill him, there's going to be some harsh words exchanged, there's going to be some bargaining, there's going to be some negotiating, maybe some pleading on Jacob's part, some way that he's going to have to appease his brother. That's going to be the best case scenario here. But this dreaded meeting went, well, different, didn't it? And it's interesting because his brother showed up with 400 men. Like, what was that? And that's one of those questions we're going to have to ask God someday, because we don't get the answer to that question either. Like, what was that? For Esau's part, he seems genuinely happy to see his brother Jacob, and he just wants to know about his family. We're not given any explanation as to why he came with those 400 men. Just tell me how you are. Tell me who these, introduce me to your family. Here's the other thing I want you to notice as they meet, that there's this embrace. And then it says they both wept. So if you can picture this as a movie, like this would be that ending that you hoped would come, like, but you weren't sure. And it would be that tender moment at the end where my wife looks at me and says, "You're not crying, are you?" No, it's something in my eye. Right? Like it's this moment like that we all feel because we're people. We've been wronged and we've wronged others. We understand what is captured in that embrace. Here's the other thing we get to see in this little tidbit as they both weep, there's a lot of complex emotions happening here, which is part of grace and forgiveness sometimes, isn't it? Like it's complicated sometimes. There's so much wrapped up in this embrace, so much that's released in these tears. Specifically, like if we just want to make it really simple, Jacob's fear is released in this embrace, and Esau's anger is released in this embrace. And so it's this emotional coming together as they reunite. Humility on Jacob's part, grace on Esau's part. So here's what I want us to see at the end of this story. I want us to notice the two sides of forgiveness that are on display here. So there's the forgiver and the forgiven, right? The one who had to give grace and the one who needed the grace. And this is how it works, right? Whenever there's an offense, there is the one who committed the offense and the one who the offense was committed against. There's the one who needs to be forgiven and the one who has to find a way to forgive. And so as you look at Jacob and Esau, like we see it all right in front of us unfolding. That's what's happening. And having spent time in their story, because we've spent so much time in their story, like we get the whole weight of what's happening there. We understand Esau's side and what was taken. We understand Jacob's side and all that he's been through and the fear of reconnecting with his brother. So we see both sides of the forgiveness equation, right? So here's a question for you. Which side is more difficult to be on? The forgiver, who has to give grace, or the forgiven, who has to receive it? Now, most of us, our gut instinct would say, oh, it's the forgiving part by far, which you would get no argument from me. There's a solid case for like, yeah, that's a really hard one, right? When you're the forgiver, there are multiple hard things going on, but some of them in forgiveness, like here's what makes it so complicated is I'm literally letting you off the hook and you don't deserve that. This is the nature of forgiveness. And the moment you throw deserve into the equation, you're not talking about forgiveness, are you? Like the whole thing with forgiveness is you don't deserve it, but I'm giving it. That's forgiveness. So forgiveness is hard, right? Because we're struck immediately with the injustice, like, I'm offering this, but man, you sure don't deserve this. And this is grace. This is what makes it so hard. Because every time we have to give grace, it is undeserved. You're choosing to give that person another chance, which that's risky, right? And depending on what that offense is, that's also undeserved, that second chance. And so it's hard to argue with this logic that, being on the forgiving side is hard. And we would all say, yes, it is. But if you've ever been on the offender side, where you're the one who needs to be forgiven, that's got its own challenges, doesn't it? Like, why is it so hard to just admit our guilt? So think of it just in small scale terms. Why in our marriages is it so hard to say, I was wrong? Like, man, those are hard words, aren't they? Like, I can hint at it, right? I can suggest, you know what I mean, and I know what you mean, so, like, are we good here? Like, but there's something about having to say the words. Like, I was wrong. That you're like, what is it that I have to, like, push that out of me to say? Am I just talking about me? I know, but I just wanted you to hear it. So there's something in us when we're on the side that needs grace, like that this is hard. And there are times, right, when we are appealing for forgiveness. And here's what I know. That if you forgive me, I cannot undo or reverse what I did. Like that would be the dream scenario, right? That when you forgive me, it's a rewind and we go back to where we were. But that's not how it works, is it? So you can forgive me, but I still have to live with, but I can't undo that. I can't reverse that. So even when we're forgiven, like we carry that weight, we can find ourselves stuck on this fact. So back to the undeserved. I don't deserve this. That is the true position of receiving grace when I fully understand that this is what I did not deserve. And again, I'll say, if you throw deserve into the equation, it's all wrecked, right? You ever had somebody try to make the case that they deserve to be forgiven? How does that make you feel? Should I punch you now or later? Right? Like the worst thing is for somebody to demand that you give them that forgiveness that they don't deserve. So it's complicated, right, on both sides. And here's the other thing, when you're on the offender side, not only do I have to live with I can't undo it, but there's some understanding when I've acknowledged that I've done something wrong, that there's a new course of action that I'm going to take. Like, because I know that's wrong, that's not something I'm going to do again. But has anybody ever struggled with that promise? Like, I don't know, I've always struggled with that bad attitude. I've always struggled with grumbling and complaining. I've always struggled with anger. I've always struggled with lust. I've always struggled with whatever it is, arrogance, right? Like, you've got these things that you put out there, and you're like, I mean, I would love to promise you I'll never be angry again, but I don't know if I can make that promise, right? And so this is the other complicated part of forgiveness is, like, you let me off the hook, and I understand that that wasn't deserved. And I also understand there's a chance that we might have to revisit this one. That makes it complicated, doesn't it? So which is more difficult? To be the forgiver or the forgiven? I mean, maybe it depends on which side you currently sit now. Whether you're the offender or the victim. But here's what I want us to see, the big picture. That forgiveness is complex and difficult. This is why it takes some work, doesn't it? Like, just like it's hard to utter the words, I was wrong, it's very hard to utter the words, I forgive you, isn't it? Most of us find it hard to forgive, but we also find it hard on the other side when we need to be forgiven. So back to Jacob and Esau. Like, here's what we know. Esau had a right to be angry. Like, we know the story. We know what was done. And so the parade of presents that he sent on ahead doesn't change the fact, right? Like, that does not change what you did. The issues and the hurts, they can't be reversed or undone. You can't earn that forgiveness. But here's the surprising part of the story, is that Esau wasn't angry. Like, that was a twist, wasn't it? Like, we were bracing for the 400 men about to wreak havoc on Jacob's family, and the bill was going to come due. Instead, he embraces him and welcomes him and lets him off the hook. So as you come to the end of the story, there's something interesting and strange that happens. This is likely, like we know the big parts of the story, this is likely one of the parts that we don't remember. So right after they come together, Esau says, let's be on our way and I'll accompany you. So we have reestablished our relationship, and you know what? Let's journey together. And Jacob, his response is, you don't need to do that. I would slow you down. I mean, I've got kids and animals, and like you guys go on ahead and we'll catch up to you. And so then Esau says to Jacob, well, let's do this. Let me just leave you some men for protection, like on your way. And he's like, no, we're good. We're good. And they part ways. Quickly, go back to Laban. Remember when they parted ways? Remember the pile of stones, the I don't trust you stones? Right? But when these guys part ways, there's no pile of stones. Like they have dealt with the issue. But here's where it gets interesting. So then we read that Esau started on his way back to Seir. And look at verse 17. Jacob, however, went to Succoth, where he built a place for himself and made shelters for his livestock. In other words, Jacob said, I'll be right there, and then he didn't go. Oh, that is not the happy ending we were expecting, was it? Jacob goes west, and Esau went south. So here's where it's a little bit complicated and messy. Like when they reconciled and now part ways again, Esau thinks they're going to be reunited, and Jacob has a plan otherwise. And so while one's expecting the brother to join him, Jacob doesn't seem that he ever intends that. Now, there are some things related to what God had told him and where he's supposed to be, and it was not Seir, so there are those things. But, I mean, there's things that could be spoken, right? And nothing was spoken. And it's interesting. Like, here's Jacob at the end of his story and all the stuff that he's come through and been through and all the work that God has been doing in him. And then it's as if his old nature just ekes out again. And he deceives Esau one more time. So I want us to hear this part of the story, because you may be thinking, boy, could we have just left it like and they reconciled and everybody lived happily ever after? But I want us to see the whole story, because it really captures the complexity of this stuff, doesn't it? Like, even after the forgiveness, even after the reconciliation, even after all the gifts had been accepted, the hugs, the tears, the family introductions, like all of that has happened. And after all of that, it's as if Jacob still can't quite believe that everything is okay between he and Esau. It's that complicated piece of both sides of the equation. He's the offender, and even though it seems okay, it's like, yeah, I don't think it's okay. So here's the question, like it brings me to, as I come to the end of the story. Like, does this diminish the reality of reconciliation? I guess there's a standpoint in which you could say it does, but I would maybe suggest, rather than diminish the this part of reconciliation, I think what it does is demonstrate just how hard this actually is in the real world. So if you have a fractured relationship in your life that you've tried to reconcile, have you ever thought to yourself, wow, this is so hard. Why is this so hard? Well, here it is. It is hard to just put all of that behind you. I don't think it says reconciliation doesn't happen or can't happen. I think it's just this recognition. And again, I'm so thankful this is in Scripture, because we get something that says, you struggle? Yes, so did Jacob and Esau. They did all of the things that you would say happy ending, and yet they struggled. Forgiveness in real life and in the real world, it is hard. Anybody agree with that?
Yes.
It is, isn't it? And so the Bible doesn't smooth it over and give you a happily ever after story. It gives you a story of like, here's how it went, here's what happened, better than anybody could imagine, but still hard. That's the reality. So is healing and restoration possible? It is. It definitely is. Is it hard? Yes, it is. It definitely is. Does forgiveness and reconciliation undo hurts or change the past? It doesn't, does it? So that's still there. So what does forgiveness do? You can make a list of things, but I would argue that one of the main things is it sets us free so that we can move ahead into the future. Because unforgiveness is like having a chain that goes back to a past event, right? And picture a leg shackle. And no matter how you try to move or get away, there's just that stinking chain that dogs you. And so forgiveness, like, is actually your option, as complicated and as hard as it is your option to take a key and unlock the shackle and be free from the past event. That's what forgiveness does. Maybe the hardest part of forgiveness, like of all of it, maybe the hardest thing is when you're in those places where you say, is it even possible? No matter which side you're on, right? Is it even possible for me to actually forgive that? Or is it even possible for me to actually be forgiven for that? This is what we're talking about. This is what we get to see in Jacob and Esau's story. And I'll remind you again, so the big story of Scripture is a redemption story, isn't it?
Yes.
And it's messy, and it's complicated, and it is not as simple and straightforward. Like when we boil our Christian faith down to a little formula, this is where a lot of people get disillusioned, don't they? Like I tried, bump, 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 and I got to tell you, it's still kind of messy right now. But here's the gospel, right? That we all are recipients of grace, and it's undeserved. You bring nothing to the table. You have no leverage, no options. You can't undo what's been done. All you can do is throw yourself at the feet of Jesus and say, I bring nothing to the table. I'm simply coming broken, right? Bad hip, but I'm getting down and asking for your forgiveness. The more amazing part for the gospel story compared to Jacob and Esau is, see, we weren't surprised when Esau came with 400 men. Well, yeah, he's going to make this thing right. He had a plan. But Jesus, he didn't come with some aggressive tactic to pin us and say, now we're going to make this thing right. Jesus laid down his life. And, see, where Jacob had to wonder, is this going to be okay? Here's the gospel. It's a standing invitation for the grace you never deserved. So for Jacob camping on the other side of the river, he doesn't even know if Esau wants to see him. He doesn't know if he's got an agenda against him. But if you picture the gospel, right? Here's the river, Here's me and my sin. Here's Jesus. And there's the standing invitation to be forgiven. And in that picture of the river, Jesus crosses to our side and says, I want to give you what's undeserved. And then we get the opportunity, the challenge, the complication of extending that same grace that's undeserved to others. I would describe Jacob's story and ours, probably two good words, right? Beautiful and complicated. And the gospel meets us with that beauty and the complication of our sin. And we're offered an invitation to come to Jesus. As we get ready